The Antarctic Treaty and the subsequent associated agreements, collectively known as the Antarctic Treaty System, regulate international relations concerning Antarctica. For the purposes of this treaty, Antarctica is defined as all lands and ice barriers located south of latitude 60 degrees south, without affecting rights over the high seas existing there. The treaty was signed in 1959 and entered into force on June 23, 1961. The original signatories were Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, the United States, France, Japan, Norway, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and the Soviet Union, while leaving open the possibility for other United Nations member states or other states invited by consensus to accede. One of the most frequently cited and, at the same time, most debated provisions of the treaty is Article 1, which establishes that Antarctica shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes and prohibits, among other things, measures of a military nature, such as the establishment of military bases and fortifications, the carrying out of military maneuvers, and the testing of any type of weapons. However, when one looks at the historical and political context, this concept of peaceful purpose begins to raise questions. The same countries that signed the treaty have continued, from 1959 to the present day, to be involved in wars, armed conflicts, and military operations on virtually every continent. Peace, it seems, has selectively defined zones of application. Many people claim that some bases may be more military than scientific in nature. Even before the treaty was signed, large-scale state and military expeditions had already been carried out in Antarctica. A clear example is Operation High Jump, conducted between 1946 and 1947 under the command of Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, involving thousands of personnel, massive logistical deployment, advanced technology, and military equipment. There was also Operation Tabarin and other subsequent expeditions. A natural question arises as to whether all files related to these operations were truly declassified, or whether part of that information remains outside public reach. Going further back in time, other names and expeditions also raise curiosity, such as James Ross in the 19th century or the Nimrod expedition, a name that draws attention because of its symbolic resonances linked to the custodians. When we look at the map of Antarctica, especially regions such as Marie Byrd Land or Queen Maud Land, names appear that are far from coincidental. Norway, for example, historically showed a strong interest in the Antarctic region. King Haakon VII financed key expeditions, and figures such as Amundsen became permanently etched into the history of the South Pole. Antarctic toponymy is not neutral. It is a record of interests, exploration, and prolonged presence by certain states. Official discourse insists that everything is done for science and for environmental protection. But this opens another legitimate question. To what extent does science also function as the perfect framework to justify strict territorial control and to limit any independent civilian access? Because despite the peaceful rhetoric, monitoring and military presence in Antarctica are evident. This leads to an inevitable question: what is really being protected or safeguarded there, and why can it not be freely observed? There is publicly available video testimony, which cannot be reproduced here due to copyright restrictions, in which a commercial airline pilot from Aerolíneas Argentinas explains the historic transpolar route between Argentina and Australia. He states that there are currently no commercial routes that cross Antarctica in the way it is often imagined, that aircraft cannot land on the continent even in emergency scenarios, and that flight paths remain far from the Antarctic landmass. He also mentions the presence of installations on the Antarctic Peninsula that he explicitly describes as military bases. This is compounded by the confusion generated in 2018 when it was announced that an airline had received approval to connect Buenos Aires with Perth, Australia. Many media outlets claimed that the route would cross Antarctica, but this is incorrect. There are no regular commercial flights that cross Antarctica. Anyone can verify this by observing current flight paths on real-time flight tracking platforms. Regarding access to the continent, the Madrid Protocol of 1991, currently in force within the Antarctic Treaty System, creates a set of indirect restrictions so strong that in practice, civilian access becomes fully conditioned. The protocol establishes that activities must be planned in such a way as to avoid harmful effects on the Antarctic environment, and to avoid impacts that are more than minimal or transitory. In addition, all activities must be subject to a prior environmental impact assessment. Added to this is Annex 5, which allows access to certain areas to be prohibited or restricted unless express authorization is granted. Is there any other place in the world with so many articles and protocols that ultimately function primarily as restrictive mechanisms? Before the Madrid Protocol entered into force, there was an earlier guideline adopted in 1994 known as the Kyoto Guidelines. Its content was even more restrictive and frankly absurd. Civilians were not allowed to touch rocks, collect any natural elements, alter the terrain, or interact with the environment in any way. In practice, visitors were reduced to passive observers. Although this guide is no longer in use and has no legal force today, it is revealing because it anticipated the strict logic of civilian access control that would later be formalized by the Madrid Protocol. The result is clear. A continent presented as for humanity becomes, in practice, a territory accessible only to a few and only through states and official structures. The Madrid Protocol itself defines Antarctica as a natural reserve dedicated to peace and science, yet leaves in the hands of the very states operating there the definition of environmental impact, the evaluations and access to restricted areas. A system that is, to say the least, curious for a territory that supposedly belongs to everyone. In the maritime domain, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, signed in 1980, operates as a de facto control authority over the Southern Ocean. It regulates who may operate, navigate, or carry out activities, defines its area of application based on the Antarctic Convergence, and establishes marine protected areas where certain activities are prohibited or severely restricted, such as the Ross Sea, one of the largest protected areas in the world. In these zones, civilians cannot navigate or operate freely. In addition, there are operational exclusion zones around bases and during logistical operations. If a civilian vessel approaches, it may be warned, diverted, or intercepted under arguments of navigational safety or environmental protection. This does not constitute classical maritime sovereignty, but it does represent effective control. Tourism is not free either. The International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators defines how many people may go ashore, where, for how long, and under what conduct. It requires certified guides, insurance, environmental plans, and predetermined routes. Independent tourism does not exist. Only authorized and guided tourism exists. And although there is no formally recognized Antarctic sovereign airspace, air routes are highly restricted, require state permits, and lack alternate airports. There are no regular civilian flights freely operating over the continent. All of this leads to an open yet unavoidable conclusion. There is no law that explicitly states it is forbidden to enter Antarctica, but there exists such a dense network of treaties, protocols, permits, assessments, and exclusions that, in practice, independent civilian access becomes impossible without the authorization and control of states. Internet access cannot be used freely either, nor do real-time live cameras exist. Instead, there are only limited systems that update periodically. Ultimately, to remove any doubt, there are no permanent public live broadcasts showing Antarctica continuously, freely, and without intermediaries.
The universe does not exist. The sky is a simulation after the human reset.